to Free the Truth News. I am Jennifer Justice. This week's show is funded by the Road Less Traveled radio show. Thank you, Chris Knight, for that. What on earth is going on down under, my friends? Australia under strict lockdowns, rights of citizens completely suspended in certain cities. Melbourne and Victoria in particular, the lockdowns and protocols are very, very strict. Whole apartment complexes are being locked down if even one person in the complex tests positive for COVID. And we all know that those PCR tests are not accurate and do produce at least 50% positives at times. Dr. Birx has gone on a press release and even admitted to as much. I have that video up on Free the Truth News if you care to find that. So what is going on? Locking down whole complexes, not even letting people leave their complex. You are not allowed to leave your house at all unless you are by yourself, have a mask, and it's only for an hour of exercise. That is all that is allotted to the people in these areas. I have a quick video from a sheriff in Melbourne talking about those protocols.
I just want to recap really briefly on what we're already doing because we have a significant commitment. We have Operation Sentinel, which is every day 500 police officers out and about, tasking, checking populous places, knocking on doors, a whole range of things. We have Operation Sentinel 2, which is the vehicle checkpoints, 8 vehicle checkpoints right around the restricted area, those permanent ones where we're checking the access and egress right throughout the state. We have Operation Shielding, 160 transit police officers, transit protective services officers, I should say, and 80 police officers from transit who are out there every day, and they're making sure that there's public assurance, they're checking who should be in proper areas, and they're enforcing as you would expect them to be doing so. And from our perspective, though, the people, the vast majority who are doing the right thing, need to understand for those who aren't, there is a consequence. And there are consequences, and I want to be really clear on that. In the last week, we've seen a trend, an emergence, if you like, of groups of people, small groups, but nonetheless concerning groups who classify themselves as sovereign citizens, whatever that might mean, people who don't think the law applies to them. We've seen them at checkpoints, baiting police, not providing their name and address. On at least 3 or 4 occasions in the past week, we've had to smash the windows of people in cars and pull them out of there so they could provide their details because they weren't telling us where they were going. They weren't adhering to the Chief Health Officer guidelines. They weren't providing their name and their address. We don't want to be doing that, but people have to absolutely understand there are consequences for your actions, and if you're not doing the right thing, we will not hesitate to issue infringements, to arrest you, to detain you where it's appropriate. The message is clear from me, and it's simple. We want you to stay at home. That's what the Chief Health Officer wants you to do. We expect you to adhere to the Chief Health Officer guidelines. If you don't, we will be enforcing those. We will issue infringements. We will arrest you. We will detain you where we have to.
Absolutely incredible, you guys, what is going on right now. I saw a video recently of a mother and daughter who were just out for a walk, but because they were not wearing a mask, they were arrested. And I believe that was in the city of Victoria. I have a couple of screenshots here from comments from those on social media who are living through this right now. If we could pull those up. One of them says, I'm currently living under this communist rule here in Victoria, Australia. We have stage 4 restrictions. We cannot leave our homes for more than 1 hour of exercise a day alone. Only one person to the supermarket a day. We have meat and food shortages. All businesses have been closed. You need papers to travel and attend essential work. You need to pass through multiple police checkpoints to go anywhere and produce your papers. What does this sound like, you guys? Papers, please. Nazi Germany. This is getting out of hand. And is it really for our safety? Let's examine that real quick by looking at some of these COVID stats in Australia. you guys have to be really careful when you look at these stats because they try and trick you. You have to pay close attention to the numbers because when you look at the sharp incline, it looks really scary, doesn't it? So in blue, I believe we have the number of, goodness, I cannot read that small. We have the number of cases, and if you look at the numbers on the side, it's, you know, about 200. There's a bit of a spike there. If you were to zoom out on this, which I didn't have time to get the stats, but if you were to zoom out on this, you would notice that there are several spikes just like that, but the overall curve has actually stayed pretty low. Cases, of course, are up because they have ramped up testing, so that is natural. If you take a look over on the other side, the numbers are totally different. That spike is only representing about a little over 20 people for the deaths. So for 20 people in the entire continent of Australia, they are using tyrannical lockdown protocols. And we have to ask ourselves, is it really worth all of this? Is this really about our safety? Amid all of this, of course, you have people who are speculating, if it's not about our safety, what is it about? A lot of people are saying that in the areas where they are locking down, they are fast-tracking 5G programs, putting up cell towers everywhere on schools, on businesses, near homes, every 100 meters, because that is how the 5G program is supposed to operate and work. And of course, there are so many conspiracy theories surrounding the 5G issue. And in UK, several towers across their country have been burnt down, whether intentionally or unintentionally, it remains unclear. But here is a brief view of some videos that I collected.
Hi guys.
Hello.
Do you work for the NHS?
No,
Who do you work for?
for community fiber.
So what are you laying?
Fiber
What kind of fibre?
optic, 5G ones.
But you're not supposed to be, and you're supposed to be essential. Is this essential work?
I think so. I don't want to.
But do you know what you're doing now? You're laying 5G.
Yeah.
You realise that, don't you? Yeah? So you know that kills people. You know when they turn this on, it's going to...
Tower. 0G now. 0G.
Green buttons, yeah. Very nice. To the left hand side. Dead. You know why? Because that's right next to it. Have you seen anything like that in your life?
That last video, he was showing an example of what the small 5G light that was installed does to the surrounding trees and wildlife. Whether or not that was actually from the 5G is unclear, but he certainly believed it to be so. The video with all the people with umbrellas, that was from Hong Kong, where they were pulling down a facial recognition camera, which was also compatible with the 5G, had a 5G tower connected to it. But despite all of the pushback from whether it be regular citizens with concerns or conspiracy theorists, I asked the question, are these concerns even valid? Some of the concerns ranging from 5G is not actually about cell reception, but actually about monitoring and surveilling us, or even conspiracies about it being a military weapon. Health concerns as well as privacy concerns abound. So I asked a scientist who specializes in electromagnetic fields. He also dabbles in a little bit of astrophysics, and he has a master's degree in Oriental medicine. This is Ramon. This is just a couple of short highlights from a much larger interview. If you want to access the full interview, that is up on my Brighteon account at Free the Truth News, Brighteon, on Brighteon. You have to go to Brighteon and look up Free the Truth News and you'll find the full interview. But here are some highlights from that.
Ramon has a bachelor's in electrical engineering, a master's in oriental medicine, and he's written over 45 heavily sourced papers on a range of different topics. Welcome, Raymond. Thank you so much, or Ramon, sorry, Ramon. Thank you so much for agreeing to join us.
No problem.
So let's get the obvious question out of the way. What is 5G?
Well, 5G is a standard. It's not only a range of frequencies in the gigahertz range, but it is a entire protocol standard that has to do with throughput and checking for errors. Think of it as a way of increasing the amount of information that we're able to share wirelessly by many-fold. Every G level has almost like an order of magnitude or more productivity in it than the previous. But the downside is because you're now operating at a much higher frequency, the penetration of that is limited. It can only go so far into the body, for example, because of the watery substrate. It just stops microwaves. And then also it only has such a distance, basically about 20 feet or so.
Okay, so that's why they would have to put towers like every 100 meters or so.
It's actually not a very bright way to go about it. It sort of reminds me of how cryptocurrency exponentially requires more energy. And to me, that's not a very smart design. If you think that the solution to life is these smartphones and the worship of smartphones, then it makes sense to try and do as much with those smartphones as possible. And in which case, it doesn't matter what you do. You just put more information through it. And of course, it's going to increase a lot of problems. There's always a cause and effect. There's always, if you do something to one side of the equation, something will happen on the other side of the equation. It's been one of the major problems of Western science. And I can say that because I have a degree in Western science and in Eastern science. So having both, I can say pretty precisely what those problems are. And they all come down to you could say a philosophical way of looking at the situation of what science should be, because it should be about improving life. And there's just a tendency to just want to do because you can. And 5G is an example of that. It's not a very efficient model. You know, when you have an outcome, a desired outcome, you can push for that outcome, but there will be effects. And that's generally true in science. The more we design things to be very, very specific to do only one thing, the more side effects they have. But those side effects might be worthwhile, but then they might not. The worst thing about 5G is the waste of energy and probably the nonlinear effect that it will generate in terms of creating starvation and a lack of, if you have only so much funding, it's the same as having only so much energy. If you have so much funding and so much energy, if all that goes to a technocracy, then you aren't by nature allocating that resource to other places.
That's something I didn't even think about, to ask. So I'm glad you covered that. Is the waste that it's going to produce? And
then to turn around and say that it's causing climate control. It's not causing climate change, but the point is that they say it is. If they say it is, isn't that convenient? Because now they can say, I need more money. I need more money for my cult of climate change because but our solution is supposed to be fixing, but it's not at all. And so a lot of Western science has become like that, where the right hand doesn't know what the left hand is doing. And when you have that situation, you get really bad results.
I wanted to talk about just like what the world's going to look like if they successfully roll out this 5G program nationwide. I know that most people think that this is just about internet speeds and like cell service, but there's actually a collection of new technologies that they're hoping to implement, like self-driving cars and facial recognition, maybe even some tracking in there. So what is the full scope of the potential, like technological potential here?
Well, I'd like to give your audience the nice news and say that we're likely to stop this. But from an art of war perspective, the sure is already in play. So we have 5G. It's all over the place. And chances are strong that they will enact, UK like scenario. I don't think they'll ever get away with the full Chinese scope of monitoring everyone. Because they have to mind the P's and Q's, right? The whole thing about controlling position is how far can you push people without them pushing back? And it turns out you can go, if you do it a little bit at a time, even a pig can move. I don't know if you've ever tried to move a pig per force, but it's actually quite difficult. Well, if the United States people and Westerners in general are the pig, you have to push very slowly because they squeal a lot. And these pigs have guns. So they move things, but slowly, but probably more than your audience wants to hear. Now, the good news is in the universe, there's a reset and there's a turnover. But at the same time, there is no knowing when that will happen. So how far can they push things before the flip comes? I can tell you that we will have a space force. We will fight certain kinds of battles in space. We won't have, Star Wars style Episode 3 blasting each other like that. It's too expensive. It's too easy to with one railgun, you can knock out any such ship. So there's no way we can afford that. But we will have energy-directed weapons. We do have energy-directed weapons. We do have lasers that can reach long distances. The military gives demonstrations of crowd control sonic devices that are very effective. They also can use microwave. Now, the neat thing about the microwave emitter that they use for riot control is that it can't go deep inside the body because of the high frequency it uses, but it makes you feel like you're in front of a roasting fire. Now, what's to say that a country that doesn't care what the ethics are, like a North Korea or China, doesn't just turn that all the way up?
So just a little bit, because you touched on the military thing, and I know from a lot of declassified documents, we know that they've already, weaponized this. They know how to weaponize it.
Right.
How hard would it be to outfit some of these towers they're putting up with some of that technology?
Not hard at all. I mean, as easy as Chinese say, as easy as turning over the palm of your hand. The technology that has me most worried is LiDAR. And the reason is that LiDAR doesn't take much to become a directed energy weapon. So now they also have a truck in the military you can watch. It was on Top Gear. This truck drove itself using LiDAR, and it had a spinning laser apparatus that could outlay the entire ground. So now you attach that to the machine that they're working on in Japan. And believe me, this will happen because humans always want to try something once, and they've seen it in the movies. They want to try it.
Yeah.
So you take a robot like the one that you can't even kick over anymore. Now they got them to where they can backflip. You attach the laser, the LiDAR, and you can attach then first bullets, and then after that you can go with laser arc.
I mean, this is sounding like an episode of Black Mirror.
Yeah, well, I mean, more or less, we're at the stage where a lot of that is becoming totally possible. Now, will it be legal for individuals to own laser arcing guns? Probably not. However, what's to stop the military or the Russian military or any government, because government is the problem, from attaching one of those to one of those trucks that can self-drive or one of those robots that can walk around and then just giving it an AI program. And that AI program is not going to care what's in your heart. It's just going to make a decision. Did you get down on the ground and kneel when you were told to? Did you present your chip when you were told to? And if you don't, then you get shot just as easily as Ryan Whitaker.
So you wrote a paper. It was a pretty extensive paper. I actually didn't have time to read through the whole thing. And it was talking about the electromagnetic fields within the body, like the natural electromagnetic fields within the body, which is, it's based on Eastern medicine. And I know that some of the findings in it touch on some of these questions that we have here about the effects that electromagnetic frequencies from outside the body can have on our bodily systems. Some of the concerns with the 5G are heart palpitations, whether or not it can mess with people's pacemakers, cancer, migraine, psychological effects. How many of those concerns are valid? And if you want to talk a little bit about the findings in your paper and how that relates.
Well, I mean, all of them are, valid. It just doesn't work the way that people are thinking it works. So, for example, microwaves, they don't all work like microwave ovens. That's the entire point of why microwave ovens they're classified in a certain way for a certain use, and your phone works on different microwaves. Because although it's cooking you, it's not cooking you in the same way. All right, because of something called resonance. All right, now when you have a wave, what's called a signal, you study it with a type of math called planar waves, and it turns out that you use a quarter of the wavelength, and then you resonate the antenna to the distance of that quarter of that wavelength. All right, so now only things in the body that are at that quarter wavelength would resonate with the 5G.
Right.
Okay. Now, if coronavirus was designed to resonate at that, then it could, but it just doesn't. Okay. And I've shown this in the blog. That isn't to say though that there's no effect. The effect would be this: when you have a body that is full of antennas of different shapes and sizes, including DNA, because DNA is electromagnetic, that will interact and create a sort of a net signal in the body of either health or disease.
Right.
And when we say disease, it's more of a disease state. All right. Now the Chinese called this zhengqi and bingqi. Okay. Now these propagate along these pathways. Sometimes it's a nerve pathway, sometimes it's a muscle pathway, sometimes it's a fascia pathway, sometimes it's a fluid pathway, but all of it is still a pathway. So it can be described as a circuit, and it can be modeled with an electromagnetic type analogy. When the signal is strong in the positive flow direction, whether that's down or it's up, depending on the area of the body, then the physiology of the cells will behave as normal. When the signal direction is reversed, then the nerve cells will, of course, ignite to indicate to the body, to the brain, there's something wrong. You can measure that with an electric field. But more importantly, these points and the entire channel themselves act fractally. So the point, the entire point can indicate the entire channel, and the entire channel can indicate the body. And so if you have an area where the transformative effect is turned off, eventually the signal will reach backwards. Now in my diagram, this from the out to the back towards the in, from the right towards the left, this Zener diode, which acts as our fuse, is supposed to only allow signals to propagate in one direction. If you have a pathogenic source or a trauma source or a parasitic source or a fungal source or something like that down the line, and it becomes stronger than the original source, it'll flow backwards. And when it does, that's disease. That's the definition of disease. You get enough of these circuits going like that in different tissues, then you have not just disease, but you have necrosis. Now, if it does it over time, if the flow of the circuit just over time breaks down, well, essentially you get damage to the DNA. Why is this machine designed to break down? Well, because it's not a good thing when the evil flows the wrong direction. Does it feel real good right now in our society? You have a constitution. That constitution is the heartbeat of the society. And then the government is, the three branches are supposed to be the literal pump about it, right? And yet it's going the opposite direction. So when you have the reverse flow, everything feels sick. So of course the prison system feels sick, and of course the education system feels sick, because the flow is in the wrong direction of the circuit. The information is more important than the signal, but the signal does have an effect because of quantum entanglement.
So One of the things that people are worried about is whether or not these wireless signals are going to affect metal trapped within the body, whether that's metal from like mercury fillings or like a screw if you have like a hip replacement, or if it's even iron within the blood. I know some people are concerned that hydroxychloroquine is some psyop, and the iron oxide that is within that medication is going to interact somehow with the wireless signals, or aluminum from vaccines or something. So which metals, if any, will these signals be able to interact with negatively?
All metals are conductive to some degree. It will depend on the length or size and shape of the antenna. And if it's a molecule, it will depend on which surface in that molecule and what it does once it's activated. But it theoretically could be done that you could design a molecule that breaks in half when it receives a 5G signal at a specific frequency. Remember, you got to be very specific with that frequency. It can't just be the entire spectrum, okay? You could create packets that unlock that, and then it splits apart and becomes a poison. I mean, but that's not very likely because, number one, it's very hard to engineer. And number two, the effect is not very guaranteed. So the question is, what are you going to be afraid of? My biggest fear is mind control. Mind control is, I think, the more ultimate weapon. And this 5G is more useful because they can put more propaganda everywhere. Because they want to have their Elysium, perfect palace in the sky, the castle in the sky motif coming out from the ancient days into our psychology. They want to be the perfects up above who can, lay down on the table and it just cures them. And down below, who the hell cares what happens to them because they're the rabble. And we can fight that. But to fight it, we got to work together. We got to be a lot smarter.
Okay, so what about nature? We've already talked about how wasteful a program like this would be, especially if we're going to be doing it nationwide or worldwide. But in terms of like the actual frequencies, how would that interact with animals, bees, plants, things like that? Is there any negative impact that it could possibly have?
Undoubtedly, because again, there is no cause without effect. Now, can the actual 5G interact with the molecules in the same way we've been discussing? Yes, but they won't propagate very far into nature.
Something that you said struck a chord with, I'm not sure if it's Agenda 21 or Agenda 30, but they were talking about getting everybody into these smart cities, which are basically sound more like smart prisons. Then they're going to have all of these rural areas become nature reserves.
Exactly. So they can go and ride horseback. You ever been around rich people riding horseback and hunting? Believe me, it's a different experience. Yes, they'll create reserves, but then once the lions suffer back, they'll go back to enjoying the rich life. I recommend people subscribe and read the Robb Report. It is an eye-opening experience to read the Robb Report. People think differently on that level. And when they have everybody in these human zoos, which is their aim, they will have the kids working. They will have some of the basic luxury to keep people from questioning the system. Okay, they still have to provide the TV. They still have to provide the stuff. The 5G enables all that because it gives the connectivity. But if it gives connectivity, it gives perfect surveillance. The perfect surveillance is the key to enacting this dystopia that is their utopia. Your dystopia is their utopia.
You touched a little on chemtrails and the fact that they're spraying our skies. I think there's nanoparticles of aluminum and strontium and a couple other things in the chemtrails. And one of the conspiracy theories is that the 5G signals are going to somehow interact with those chemtrails and tie into the HARP program and give them more control over the weather. Is there any validity to that?
HARP doesn't have the power to go. It's a unidirectional. I recommend people watch the Curious Droid channel. Has a video on HARP. Go watch that video and you'll learn quite a deal about HARP's capabilities because they've been mostly published. HARP has almost nothing to do with it. Now, the geoengineering is real. They have conferences. They've announced themselves.
So two final questions here, and I'm going to tie them in together. It's about how to protect ourselves. First of all, how do we fight against these agendas? And second of all, if they're going to succeed in rolling this out, and they've already succeeded in rolling it out in certain areas, how do we protect ourselves because we did talk a little bit about how it affects the body and the fact that, some of these health concerns are valid. So, like, what are some ways that we can protect our bodies from these harmful frequencies? And then
Well,
how do we fight the overall agenda?
You can actually buy devices for measuring signals, and you can find dead spots in neighborhoods. You can go out in the rural area. If they put one up before you know it, it's a little late. I mean, they're not going to, you tear it down, they're going to attack you for vandalism. If you know about it ahead of time, you can petition your local government, and if you're loud enough, they will move it just to get rid of you, just to avoid you. They'll think that you're the crazy, and so they'll just find a way to put it somewhere else. Secondly, to protect yourself from the agenda, you must become martial. You must also create defenses, and you need to use what they use against them. You'll need to have smart protection, but just don't buy the Google Nest, don't buy Amazon and Alexa and Siri. You've got to go with independent options.
When it comes to like health and stuff like that, I mean, you have all these people selling things like shungite and organite and different crystals and things.
Yes.
Are those hoaxes? Do those actually work?
No, it's not. I can't speak about organite because it says ite. It's not a mineral. Organite is a mixture of several different things, dielectrics and conductors. It probably works, but I've never tested it myself. As far as organite, there's no chi in organite. I've sensed there's no chi. But real crystals work, and they work the way that people generally think. But of course, I go with the Chinese versions of things. The Chinese figured out a lot of things in the old days. Stick to the basics. You have your 5 elements, and you have the colors that are associated with those, and you have stones that have those colors. If you could learn those 5 and how they interact with each other, and which ones control which and everything, then you could use those colors in your food, in your clothes, in your personality, in the sounds. All the things can be used to work with your body.
So one last question, like, can grounding help if you maybe have been around these frequencies a little bit too much?
Yeah, but I would recommend peat bog oak, because peat bog oak is a black body. It's mostly carbon because it's almost coal, and it's wood, so it doesn't need to be recharged on a bed of salt or on the ground. And you can sleep with it. You can lay it on your chest, and it will actually shunt these negative charges out of your body.
There's so much to unpack here, and I'd love to have you back on for another one. I don't know about you, but I plan on being one of those squealing pigs you were talking about. Make it hard for them to.
Let's make you more like a warthog, and you can put a tusk or two up the jack side. The thing is that the good news is they're wusses. Okay, so if you can reach inside yourself and find that inner knight, or that inner warrior, they're frightened of that. They're scared to death of it.
All right, you guys, that was a really expansive interview that I did. Again, the original clip was an hour and a half. And if you want to access that, it is on my Brighteon account. And later this week, I will post that on Facebook as well for you guys to watch. I might do a watch party. Ramon is also a prominent member of the Ancient Kentucky Historical Association, and he is going to be doing an academic event online, which you guys are all invited to if you're interested. The proceeds of that are going to be going to the Ancient Kentucky Historical Association to help them with research purposes, and also to help the elderly come to some of their events. So it's a good cause. I have the link to that pinned in the comments of this live video. I'm going to take some phone calls now. I got to turn up the sound on this phone. If you guys have questions, I'll try and answer them as best I can. Or if you just want to discuss, give me your opinions on what's going on in this world, opinions on 5G, on a lot of the protocols and mandates that are happening across the country and across the world. Let's chat. Let's have a chat. Let's see if anyone calls for that. There's been a big push for wearing masks even inside your home, or during Zoom calls or things for remote learning, which to me, I mean, it can't get much more obvious that this is not about safety. I mean, who would wear a mask within their own home unless people within the home were sick? But there's been a massive push across the country from random different governors and sheriffs and school boards to force children to wear masks while doing remote learning classes. The purpose, they say, of this is to train them, how to properly wear their masks so that when they go to school, it's not as difficult to enforce those things. Really controversial topic, putting masks on children, if you ask me. I can't see this ending well. To me, it smacks of child abuse, if you ask me. But also, certain governors and sheriffs trying to tell people in certain areas of the country just to wear masks in general around your own home. I cannot imagine. I have trouble personally wearing a mask even for 15 minutes to go into a store, let alone wearing one 24/7. In fact, if you look on the OSHA guidelines for safety when wearing a mask, they recommend that you change out the mask every 2 hours, which most people are not doing because of the buildup of bacteria within the mask, and which messes with the effectiveness of the mask because it clogs the pores within that. It also, the more those pores within the mask fibers are clogged, the harder it is for you to breathe. So can you imagine, you guys, having to wear a mask for even a full school day? It's a bit much. And it's definitely a bit much for our children. But if you want to give that call number, 401-307-1011. And let me hear your opinions on anything that we discussed today. I'm wondering if I got the number wrong. This is my first time doing call-ins. Let me just double check this number here and make sure that I got it correct. Yep. All right. So if there are no questions or answers, I might just cut this a little bit early. Thank you guys so much for watching. And despite how dark it may look, just know that the sun is coming.